In the Gospel of Matthew chapter 7, Jesus makes one of his most famous promises. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened. Every Christian has quoted this verse. Every believer has tried it. But if it works, why doesn't it work? Why have millions prayed and asked and received nothing? Churches blame lack of faith. They say you didn't believe hard enough. They say God's answer was no. They're lying. The promise works, every time, without exception. But you're asking wrong. You're asking from the wrong level, with the wrong understanding, using the wrong technique. Place your hand on your heart, left side. That's where asking originates when done correctly. Not from your head, not from desperate need, from your heart center, from the place where human will and divine will can align. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 92, records what Jesus actually said. Seek and you will find. But the things you asked me about before, and which I did not tell you then, now I am willing to tell them. But you do not inquire about them. Jesus is saying, you're asking about the wrong things. You're asking from the wrong consciousness. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 2, reveals the complete teaching. Let him who seeks continue seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will be troubled. When he becomes troubled, he will be astonished, and he will rule over all. This isn't about getting what you want. This is about discovering what you actually are. What you're about to learn changes everything. Because the asking technique Jesus taught has nothing to do with petition, nothing to do with begging an external deity for favours, nothing to do with the transactional prayer model churches have sold for 2,000 years. The technique is recognition. It's a specific method of consciousness alignment that produces verifiable results when performed correctly. And the reason it was suppressed, the reason you've never heard this explained properly, is because when people learn to ask correctly, they stop needing intermediaries. They stop needing priests, pastors, spiritual authorities. They access direct knowing, and institutions cannot monetize direct knowing. In the next 2 hours, you're going to learn the actual technique Jesus taught for what he called asking. You'll understand why conventional prayer fails, what the 3 fundamental errors in how people ask are, how to correct those errors, and most importantly, you'll receive a step-by-step method you can begin practicing immediately. By the end of this video, you'll know how to ask from heart consciousness rather than mental petition, how to shift from separation awareness to recognition awareness, how to practice the 3 levels of asking that Jesus outlined in the Thomas Gospel, and how to verify your results through direct experience rather than belief. This isn't theory. This is practical technique with historical lineage, documented in multiple early Christian texts that didn't make it into your Bible, practiced by desert mystics and early Christian contemplatives, and still producing consistent results for those who learn the actual method rather than the watered-down version churches teach. Let's start with what you think you know. Matthew 7:7 says, Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened to you. You've probably heard sermons about this verse. You've probably been told it means God will give you what you pray for if you have enough faith. Maybe you've been told to be specific in your requests, to visualize what you want, to claim your blessings, to pray with confidence. And maybe you've tried all that. Maybe you've asked sincerely, believed genuinely, waited patiently, and maybe you got nothing. Or you got some things but not others, with no clear pattern for why some prayers were answered and others weren't. So you concluded either that God's will is mysterious, that your faith was insufficient, that you're not worthy, or that the promise simply doesn't work the way churches claim. You're correct on that last point. The promise doesn't work the way churches claim. But that's because churches have been teaching a corrupted version, a version that serves institutional control rather than individual liberation. The original teaching, preserved in texts like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Pistis Sophia, and referenced in Nag Hammadi materials, describes something entirely different. Not petition, recognition. Not begging for things you lack, acknowledging what you already are. The asking Jesus taught isn't about getting God to give you something external. It's about recognizing what's already present within your own consciousness, already present in the nature of reality itself, already present but obscured by layers of conditioned misperception. Here's what actually happens when you pray conventionally. You identify something you want: money, health, relationship, success, whatever. You formulate that want into words. You address those words to God, conceived as an external power separate from yourself. You make your request. You wait. You hope. And one of three things happens. First possibility, you get what you asked for. You attribute this to God answering your prayer. You feel grateful. But you haven't learned anything fundamental. You've simply had a desire fulfilled. Soon you're asking for something else. Second possibility, you don't get what you asked for. You either blame yourself for insufficient faith, accept that God said no, or start doubting whether prayer works at all. Third possibility, you get something adjacent to what you ask for, and you interpret this ambiguous result however suits your belief system. None of these outcomes produce liberation. None produce direct knowing. None transform consciousness. They're all transactional, all based on the paradigm of you here, separate from God there, asking for things you lack. Jesus' teaching, as preserved in the Thomas tradition, operates from an entirely different paradigm. The Gospel of Philip states it clearly. Light and darkness, life and death, right and left, are brothers of one another. They are inseparable. Because of this, neither are the good good, nor the evil evil, nor is life life, nor death death. For this reason, each one will dissolve into its original nature, but those who are exalted above the world are indissoluble, eternal. What this means in practical terms: the dualistic framework where you're separate from what you seek is itself the obstacle. The asking that Jesus taught doesn't reinforce that separation, it dissolves it. It's a technique for recognizing that what you seek and what you are exist in the same consciousness, the same source, the same origin. Not metaphorically, literally, at the level of direct experience. The Gospel of Thomas saying 3 elaborates, Jesus said, "If those who lead you say to you, 'See, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, 'It is in the sea,' the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father. But if you will not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty." The kingdom isn't a place you go after death. It's not a reward for good behavior. It's a state of consciousness you can access now, in this moment, through correct understanding of what you are, and asking in Jesus' teaching is the primary technique for that access. Let me be specific about what I mean by technique. This isn't vague spiritual advice. This is a step-by-step method with observable stages, predictable obstacles, and verifiable results. When practiced correctly, it produces specific phenomenological experiences that practitioners across centuries have reported with remarkable consistency. The Desert Fathers called it hesychasm, though they focus particularly on the Jesus prayer variation. The early Christian mystics called it contemplation or theosis. Modern researchers studying contemplative practice call it non-dual awareness or awakening. But the core technique, the actual method Jesus taught according to the Thomas Gospel, has specific components that must be understood and practiced correctly for it to work. Before we go deeper into the technique itself, you need to understand why you've never heard this version, why churches teach petition-based prayer instead. The reason is structural, not conspiratorial. When Christianity became institutionalized under Constantine in the 4th century, when it shifted from persecuted mystery school to state religion, the teachings had to be modified. A state religion needs controllable subjects, not liberated mystics. It needs people who believe salvation comes through institutional channels: baptism, communion, confession, tithes. It needs people who position religious authorities as necessary intermediaries between themselves and God. The original teaching, the one where each person can access direct knowing without intermediaries, where asking correctly produces immediate recognition rather than deferred reward, where the kingdom is accessed internally rather than through institutional ritual, that teaching undermines the entire structure, so texts that preserve that teaching were labelled heretical. The Gospel of Thomas wasn't included in the canonical Bible when the New Testament was assembled in the 4th century. Neither was Philip. Neither were dozens of other texts that documented the practical, experiential, consciousness-based techniques Jesus actually taught. Instead, the Bible was compiled with texts that could be interpreted to support institutional authority, eternal reward and punishment paradigms, and the necessity of priestly mediation. The asking technique was simplified into petition prayer, stripped of its consciousness transformation components, reduced to a transaction that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, based on mysterious divine will. And for 1700 years that's the version most Christians have learned. But the original text survived. The Nag Hammadi library, discovered in Egypt in 1945, contained multiple copies of these suppressed Gospels. When scholars translated them, when historians studied them, when practitioners actually tried the techniques they described, something remarkable became clear. These texts document a complete system of consciousness development, not belief-based religion, not moral codes for social control, but practical methods for direct experience of what Jesus called the kingdom, what the texts sometimes call gnosis, what we might call unmediated knowing of ultimate reality. And at the centre of that system is the practice of asking, not as petition, but as recognition. Let's examine the 3 fundamental errors in conventional asking, the errors that prevent the promise from working. First error, you're asking for things within the material system. The texts call this system the archonic realm, or the kingdom of the world. It's not that material reality is evil, or that wanting health or resources is wrong. It's that when you position your asking entirely within material concerns, when you ask for better circumstances within the existing framework of separation consciousness, you reinforce the very paradigm that creates suffering. You're asking the prison warden for better conditions inside the prison. Sometimes a request is granted, sometimes it isn't. But either way, you remain imprisoned in separation consciousness, still believing you're a separate self lacking things that exist outside you, still dependent on external sources for fulfillment, still trapped in the cycle of desire and satisfaction, and new desire. The Gospel of Thomas saying 110 states, Jesus said, "Whoever finds the world and becomes rich, let him renounce the world." This isn't about literal poverty, it's about understanding what the texts mean by world. The world in Gnostic terminology is the system of perception that takes material separation as ultimate reality. When you find that world and become rich in it, when you succeed according to its metrics, you face a choice. Remain identified with that success, with that separate self-position, or recognize that the whole framework is provisional, that a deeper reality exists underneath. The asking Jesus taught doesn't request success within the material system. It requests liberation from identification with the material system as ultimate reality. Second error, you're asking from separation consciousness. Every time you pray, "God, please give me X," you're reinforcing a fundamental structure. I am here, separate. God is there, separate. I lack something. God has it. I must petition God to transfer it to me. This isn't wrong because it's disrespectful or because God doesn't like being petitioned. It's wrong because it's based on a misperception of what you are. The texts are explicit about this. The Gospel of Philip states, "Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die they will receive nothing." The resurrection being referenced isn't physical body resurrection after death. It's resurrection from the death of separation consciousness into the life of recognition consciousness while still alive in a body. When you ask from separation consciousness, when you position yourself as fundamentally lacking, as essentially separate from the divine source, as dependent on external power to grant you things you don't have, you cannot receive in the way Jesus meant, because what he's offering isn't things, it's knowing. Knowing of what you actually are. And you can't know what you actually are while simultaneously insisting that you're a separate self lacking things. The two positions are mutually exclusive. This is why he says in Thomas saying 70, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. If you do not have that within you, what you do not have within you will kill you." What's within you isn't a thing. It's your actual nature, your actual identity, which isn't separate self, but consciousness itself expressing through this particular form. Third error, you're asking with the wrong motivation. Most conventional prayer comes from desire to improve your circumstances within material reality. You want more money so you can be more comfortable. You want better health so you can avoid suffering. You want relationship success so you can feel loved. These aren't bad desires. But they're all oriented toward making your experience as a separate self more pleasant. And the asking Jesus taught isn't about that. It's about discovering you're not actually a separate self. It's about experiencing directly what you are underneath the conditioned identity. It's about liberation from the entire framework of separate self-seeking satisfaction, not better satisfaction within that framework. The Gospel of Thomas saying 29 records, Jesus said, "If the flesh came into being because of spirit, it is a wonder. But if spirit came into being because of the body, it is a wonder of wonders. Indeed, I am amazed at how this great wealth has made its home in this poverty." The great wealth is consciousness, spirit, your actual nature. The poverty is the body, material form, the separate self-identity. When you ask with motivation of improving the poverty, of making the body identity more successful, you miss the wealth entirely. The asking Jesus taught comes from desire to know the wealth, to experience what you actually are, to dissolve the identification with poverty not by getting more things, but by recognizing you were never actually poor. Now let's examine the correct way to ask. The Gospel of Thomas saying 2 gives the complete structure. "Let him who seeks continue seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will be troubled. When he becomes troubled, he will be astonished. And he will rule over all." This isn't metaphor. It's a precise description of phenomenological stages that occur when you practice the technique correctly. Seeking is the first stage. Finding is the second. Being troubled is the third. Astonishment is the fourth. Ruling is the fifth. Each stage has specific characteristics, specific obstacles, specific methods for moving through it. Let's break it down. Seeking in Jesus' teaching doesn't mean searching externally for something you don't have. It means placing attention on what you seek in a very specific way. The Gospel of Philip explains, "Light and darkness, life and death, right and left, are brothers of one another. They are inseparable." When you seek correctly, you're not seeking something absent. You're seeking to recognize what's present but unrecognized. If you seek peace, you don't search for peace somewhere else. You place attention on the peace that already exists beneath all disturbance, beneath all mental chatter, beneath all emotional turbulence. The peace isn't something you create or acquire. It's already present in consciousness itself. Seeking is learning to place attention there, to recognize it directly. The technique is specific. You sit in stillness. physical stillness first, because mental stillness follows more easily when the body isn't moving. You close your eyes or soften your gaze. You bring awareness to your heart center, the physical area in the middle of your chest, not your biological heart on the left, the energetic center in the sternum area. Place your attention there. Feel the sensations present in that area. Don't try to create special feelings. Just notice what's already there. Warmth, pressure, pulsation, openness, tightness, whatever is present. This is the first step, because asking from heart consciousness is fundamentally different from asking from mental consciousness. Mental asking is verbal, conceptual, future-oriented. You think words, you formulate requests, you imagine outcomes, you hope for future states. This keeps you locked in separation consciousness because it's all about you now lacking something you future might have. Heart asking is non-verbal, present, recognition-based. You don't think about what you seek. You place awareness directly on the quality of what you seek, and that quality is already present in this moment, already accessible in immediate experience, already here but unrecognized because attention has been trained to focus elsewhere. Let me give you a concrete example. Say you seek peace. Conventional asking, God, please give me peace. I'm anxious and disturbed, and I need you to calm my mind. This is mental asking, future-oriented, separation-based. Heart asking, you sit in stillness. You place awareness in your heart center. You notice that underneath all the anxiety, underneath all the mental disturbance, there's a quality of stillness present. Not the mental stillness of no thoughts, but the stillness of awareness itself, which remains unchanged whether thoughts are present or absent, whether emotions are pleasant or disturbing. That stillness is peace, not the absence of disturbance, but the presence of what doesn't disturb regardless of what arises. You don't ask God to give you that peace. You place attention fully on that peace which is already present. You rest in recognition of it. This is asking correctly, not petition for something absent, recognition of something present. And the Gospel of Thomas says, when you seek like this, you will find, not eventually, not after sufficient faith or good behavior. You will find because you're placing attention directly on what's actually there. The finding is inevitable once seeking is oriented correctly. But here's where it gets interesting. The saying states that when you find, you will be troubled. Why troubled? Because finding dissolves your comfortable illusions about what you are. When you find peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, when you experience the stillness of awareness that remains regardless of what arises in that awareness, when you recognize directly that what you are isn't the anxious mind or disturbed emotions, but the consciousness in which those arise, it troubles your entire identity structure. You thought you were the person who needs peace. Now you're experiencing that you are peace, and the person who needs it is a constructed identity, a pattern of thought and feeling arising in consciousness, but not actually what consciousness is. This is troubling. It destabilizes your familiar sense of self. It challenges everything you've believed about who you are. The texts are explicit that this destabilization is necessary, is part of the process, is not a sign you're doing it wrong, but a sign you're doing it right. The Gospel of Philip states, "Those who say that the Lord died first and then rose up are in error, for he rose up first and then died. If one does not first attain the resurrection, he will not die." The resurrection is the finding, the direct recognition of what you actually are. The death is the dissolution of the false identity. You must find first, must experience what you actually are, before the constructed self can die. Otherwise, you're just trying to kill the ego, trying to become nobody, which is another form of seeking within separation consciousness. When you become troubled, when the recognition destabilizes your familiar identity, if you continue practicing rather than retreating back into comfortable ignorance, You reach the third stage, astonishment. Astonishment happens because what you find isn't what you expected. You expected to get things, to acquire peace, or love, or wisdom as possessions you could own. Instead, you receive knowing, direct, unmediated knowing of what you are. And what you are is so different from what you thought, so much vaster, so much more immediate, so much more obvious once seen, that astonishment is the natural response. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 50, describes this. Jesus said, "If they say to you, 'Where did you come from?' say to them, 'We came from the light,' the place where the light came into being on its own accord and established itself, and became manifest through their image. If they say to you, 'Is it you?' say, 'We're its children, we're the elect of the living Father.' If they ask you, 'What is the sign of your Father in you?' say to them, 'It is movement and repose.'" Movement and repose, activity and stillness, the consciousness that contains both, that is neither, that witnesses both without being either. When you're astonished by recognition of this, when you experience directly that you are the consciousness in which all movement and all repose occur, you reach the fifth stage, ruling. Ruling doesn't mean political power or control over others, it means sovereignty, complete freedom from being governed by the archonic system. When you know what you are, when that knowing is direct, stable, unshakable, you're no longer controlled by the mechanisms that control separate self-consciousness. Fear of death? You've recognized your consciousness itself, which doesn't die when forms dissolve. Desire for things? You've recognized you already are the fullness, the kingdom, what all desires actually seek. Need for approval? You've recognized you are the awareness that witnesses all approval and disapproval without being touched by either. This is ruling, not power over, but freedom from being ruled by. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 2, concludes, "And he will rule over all." All doesn't mean all people. It means all phenomena, all experience, all arising. When you recognize what you are, phenomena still arise, thoughts, emotions, sensations, perceptions, but they no longer rule you. They arise in you in consciousness, but consciousness isn't governed by them, isn't defined by them, isn't limited to them. This is the completion of the asking process, not getting what you want, but discovering what you are, and in that discovery finding that what you are is what all wanting actually seeks. Now let's go deeper into the practical technique. The method has 3 levels, corresponding to 3 different depths of practice. First level is asking for things. Most people operate here. You want money, health, relationship, success. You formulate that want into a request. You address it to God or the universe or your higher self. You wait for results. Sometimes you get what you ask for, sometimes you don't. But whether you receive or not, nothing fundamental changes. You remain in separation consciousness, still identified as a separate self seeking things external to itself, still dependent on acquiring things for fulfillment. Jesus taught this level not because it's the goal, but because it's where people are. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 92 records his frustration with this. Seek and you will find. But the things you asked me about before and which I did not tell you then, now I am willing to tell them, but you do not inquire about them. People kept asking about things, healing, provisions, earthly concerns. He answered those questions to meet people where they were. But he was trying to point to deeper questions. Questions about what they actually are. Questions that would lead to the second and third levels of asking. Second level is asking for understanding. At this level, you're no longer primarily seeking things. You're seeking to understand, to know truth, to grasp what's real. This is a significant shift. Instead of give me money, you're asking show me truth about prosperity. Instead of heal my body, you're asking help me understand the nature of health and illness. This level begins to shift consciousness because you're orienting toward knowing rather than having. but it's still positioned as separation. You here, truth there, you needing to acquire understanding you don't currently have. The Desert Fathers practiced this level extensively. Their writings, collected in texts like the Philokalia, document thousands of hours of practice where they would ask questions like, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me," repeatedly, not seeking things but seeking understanding, seeking mercy in the sense of divine knowledge, seeking to understand the nature of Christ consciousness. This practice produced profound results. Practitioners reported experiences of light, inner stillness, direct knowing, transformation of character, but many remained at the level of seeking understanding from an external source, rather than recognizing understanding as their own nature. Third level is asking as recognition. This is what Jesus actually taught, what the Thomas Gospel preserves, what produces the 5-stage progression from seeking to ruling. At this level, you're not requesting something external to give you something you lack. You're asking as recognition of what already is, not "God, give me peace," or even "God, help me understand peace." But I recognize that peace is, that it exists as the nature of consciousness itself, and I ask only that my awareness align with what's true, that the illusion dissolve, that I see clearly what was always present. The technique for third level asking is precise. First, physical preparation. You need stillness, not absolute motionlessness, but a posture you can maintain for 20 to 30 minutes without major discomfort. Sitting is traditional, chair or floor doesn't matter. Spine reasonably upright so you don't fall asleep but not rigid. Hands resting somewhere comfortable. Eyes closed or gently lowered. The body position matters because you're going to be placing attention on internal phenomena, and that's easier when external sensory input is minimized. Second, breath awareness. Don't try to control your breath. Just notice it. Feel the sensations of breathing in your nose, throat, chest, belly. Let your attention rest on those sensations for a few minutes. This serves two purposes. It grounds you in direct sensory experience rather than conceptual thought, and it begins to train attention, to practice placing awareness where you choose rather than letting it be pulled by whatever thought arises. Third, heart centering. After a few minutes of breath awareness, shift attention to your heart center, the physical area in the middle of your chest, around the sternum. Place awareness there. Notice what you feel, not what you think about that area, what you actually feel as direct sensation. Warmth, coolness, pressure, openness, tightness, pulsation, vibration, whatever is present. Let your awareness rest there. If attention wanders to thoughts, gently return it to the sensations in your heart center. Practice this for another few minutes until attention can remain relatively stable in that location. Fourth, the asking. This is where it differs fundamentally from conventional prayer. You don't formulate a verbal request. You don't think words like, "Please give me peace." Instead, you ask with attention itself. If you seek peace, you place attention on peace, not the concept of peace, not thoughts about peace, but the actual quality of peace, which is present right now in your direct experience. Where is it present? In the stillness of awareness itself. Underneath all the mental movement, underneath all the emotional turbulence, there's a quality of stillness. Not the stillness of no thoughts, but the stillness of that which witnesses thoughts without moving. Place your attention fully on that stillness. Rest in it. Don't try to create it or enhance it. Just recognize it's there and place awareness on it. When thoughts arise, and they will, notice them, but keep primary attention on the stillness that remains unchanged by thought arising. When emotions surface, notice them, but keep primary attention on the awareness that experiences emotions without being emotions. When physical sensations become prominent, notice them, but keep primary attention on the consciousness that knows sensation without being sensation. This is asking as recognition. You're not asking for peace to be given to you. You're asking as recognizing that peace already exists as the nature of awareness itself, and you're placing attention fully on that recognition until it becomes direct experience rather than concept. The Gospel of Philip states, "The perfect human being will not only be unable to be grasped, but will not be able to be seen, for if they are seen, they are grasped." No one will be able to receive this grace in any other way unless they put on the perfect light, and they themselves become perfect light. Whoever has put it on will enter. Putting on the perfect light means placing attention so fully on the light of consciousness that you recognize yourself as that light rather than as the phenomena illuminated by it. This is the asking technique. Not petition, recognition. And it works. Every time. Without exception. Not because you're getting something you didn't have, but because you're recognizing what was always present but unrecognized. Fifth, continuation. This isn't a one-time practice. The Gospel of Thomas saying 2 says, "Let him who seeks continue seeking until he finds." You practice daily, 20 to 30 minutes minimum. The first days or weeks, you're training attention to remain on what you choose rather than being pulled by thought. This is mechanical practice, repetition, building capacity. It might feel boring or pointless. Practice anyway. You're developing a skill like learning an instrument. Initial practice is mechanical before it becomes musical. After some weeks of daily practice, attention becomes more stable. You can place it on heart consciousness or on the stillness of awareness, and it remains there for longer periods without being pulled away by thought. When this capacity develops, the asking becomes more profound. You're not just thinking about peace or trying to feel peaceful. You're resting attention in the peace that is, and that sustained attention begins to dissolve the identification with the one who needs peace. The troubled stage begins. Sixth, the troubled stage. You've practiced for weeks or months. Your attention has become relatively stable. You can recognize the stillness of awareness underneath mental movement, and then something disturbing happens. You notice that the one who's been practicing, the one who's been seeking peace, the one who's been trying to get enlightened, that one is itself a pattern of thought and feeling arising in awareness. It's not what you are. It's not awareness itself. It's content in awareness. This recognition is troubling because your entire life has been organized around that one. That sense of being a separate self with preferences and aversions, with history and future, with identity and purpose. When you recognize that the separate self is content in awareness rather than awareness itself, everything becomes unstable. You might experience periods of confusion, meaninglessness, fear. The texts call this the dark night, the crucifixion, the descent into the underworld. It's not psychological illness, though it can look similar to outsiders. It's the natural destabilization that occurs when attention has become stable enough to recognize what you actually are. And that recognition conflicts with a lifetime of conditioning that insisted you are a separate self. The crucial instruction for this stage is continue practicing. Don't try to fix the destabilization. Don't retreat into familiar identity. Don't seek comfort in old patterns of separate self-seeking. Continue placing attention on the stillness of awareness. Continue recognizing that thoughts arise in that stillness, emotions arise in that stillness. The entire sense of being a separate self arises in that stillness. Continue asking as recognition. The destabilization is necessary. It's the dissolution of false identity. If you continue practicing through it rather than retreating from it, you reach astonishment. Seventh, the astonishment stage. After days or weeks or months of the troubled stage, depending on practice consistency and individual factors, something shifts. The recognition that you are awareness rather than the contents of awareness becomes stable, not as a belief, as direct, unshakable knowing. You experience yourself as the consciousness in which all phenomena arise rather than as a phenomenon arising in consciousness. This is astonishing, not because it's exotic or supernatural, but because it's so ordinary, so obvious, so constantly present that you missed it for your entire life. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 113, describes this. His disciples said to him, "When will the kingdom come?" Jesus said, "It will not come by waiting for it. It will not be a matter of saying here it is or there it is. Rather, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it." The kingdom isn't hidden in some other realm. It's here, now, constantly present as the consciousness you already are. But you don't see it, because you're looking for something other than what you are. When you recognize what you are, when that recognition becomes stable, astonishment is natural. You are seeking everywhere except where it actually is. You are looking for your glasses while wearing them. Eighth, the ruling stage. As recognition stabilizes, as you increasingly experience yourself as awareness rather than as contents of awareness, sovereignty develops. You're no longer ruled by phenomena because you recognize they arise in you rather than you arising in them. Fear arises. You witness fear arising in awareness. The fear might be intense, might produce physical symptoms, might generate thoughts. But awareness isn't afraid. Awareness experiences fear without being fear. This recognition is freedom. Not freedom from fear arising, freedom from being ruled by fear. The same with desire. Things are still desired, preferences still exist, but you recognize that desires arise in awareness, and awareness isn't lacking what desires seek. The fullness is already present in awareness itself. So desires might be acted on or not acted on, but they don't drive behavior from a position of lack anymore. They arise as movements in consciousness, sometimes appropriate to act on, sometimes not, but in either case not ruling consciousness. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 77, states, Jesus said, "It is I who am the light which is above them all. It is I who am the all. From me did the all come forth, and unto me did the all extend. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there." This isn't Jesus claiming unique divine status. It's Jesus describing what he recognized about his own nature and what he taught others to recognize about theirs. The I being referenced is consciousness itself, the awareness that illuminates all phenomena, from which all phenomena arise, to which all phenomena return. When you recognize that I as what you actually are, you rule over all because you recognize that all arises in you. Now let's address the obstacles. The most common obstacle in first level asking is inconsistency. People pray when they're desperate, when they need something, when circumstances are difficult. Then when things improve, prayer becomes sporadic or stops. This prevents development because the practice never progresses beyond petition. You're using prayer as emergency relief rather than as consciousness development. The teaching isn't about getting God to fix your problems, it's about recognizing what you are. That requires consistent practice regardless of circumstances. Second obstacle is expecting results on your timeline. You pray for something. You expect it to manifest within days or weeks or months. When it doesn't, you conclude prayer doesn't work. But third level asking isn't about manifesting things. It's about recognizing what you are. And that recognition happens on its own timeline, determined by practice consistency and individual factors beyond your control. Some people practice for weeks before the troubled stage begins. Others practice for years. The variation doesn't mean some are doing it right and others wrong. It means the process has its own timing. The Gospel of Philip addresses this. Faith receives, love gives. No one can receive without faith. No one can give without love. Because of this, in order that we may indeed receive, we believe, but it is so that we may love and give, since if one does not give in love, he has no profit from what he has given. Faith in this context means consistent practice based on trust in the teaching rather than on immediate results. Love means continuing to practice not for what you'll get, but as recognition of what you already are. When you practice with this orientation, results occur naturally in their own time. Third obstacle is intellectual understanding replacing direct experience. You can read about the technique. You can understand conceptually that you are awareness rather than contents of awareness. You can believe this is true, but until you practice the technique, until you actually place attention on the stillness of awareness repeatedly, until recognition occurs as direct experience rather than concept, you haven't asked correctly. Knowing about the technique isn't the same as practicing the technique. The Gospel of Thomas saying 3 states, "When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known." Knowing yourself isn't intellectual knowledge, it's direct recognition through practice. Fourth obstacle is seeking experiences rather than recognition. As you practice, various phenomena might occur. You might feel energy moving in your body. You might see lights. You might have insights or revelations. You might experience bliss or profound peace. These are all contents of awareness. They're not what you are. If you start chasing these experiences, if you practice in order to feel good or have special states, you've reverted to first level asking. You're seeking things again. The practice is about recognizing what you are, which is the awareness in which experiences arise, not the experiences themselves. Fifth obstacle is isolation. The teaching was transmitted in community, teacher to student, practitioner to practitioner. When you practice alone without guidance, without others who understand the process, you can get stuck in obstacles without knowing how to work with them. The Desert Fathers practiced in community. The early Christian mystics had spiritual directors. The texts document the importance of finding others who practice, who can recognize the stages you're experiencing, who can provide guidance when you encounter obstacles. This doesn't mean you need a guru. It means finding others serious about the practice, establishing relationships where you can discuss experiences, receive feedback, and support each other's development. Let's go deeper into advanced practice variations. The basic technique is placing attention on the stillness of awareness underneath mental movement, but there are multiple doorways into that recognition. Different practitioners find different doorways more accessible based on individual factors. The breath doorway involves placing attention on the space between breaths. The gap after exhaling before inhaling begins. In that gap, there's a natural stillness. If you place attention there consistently, you begin to recognize that the stillness isn't created by the pause in breathing. The stillness is always present. The breath pause just makes it more obvious. The sensation doorway involves placing attention on any sensation in your body and investigating what's experiencing the sensation. You feel pressure in your hand. Who feels it? You might initially think, I feel it. But if you investigate that you'll find it's not a thing. It's awareness itself. The sensation is known by awareness. Awareness isn't the sensation. It's what the sensation appears in. If you place attention on the awareness that knows sensation, you enter recognition of what you are. The hearing doorway involves placing attention on sound, any sound, traffic, birds, silence, whatever is present. Notice that sound arises in awareness. Awareness hears sound but isn't sound. Now shift attention from the sound to the hearing itself, the awareness that knows sound. Rest attention there. This can be particularly powerful because unlike visual attention, which has a direction, hearing is omnidirectional. When you rest in hearing awareness, you're resting in awareness that has no direction, no location, no boundaries. This can facilitate recognition of awareness as what you are. The love doorway involves placing attention on the feeling of love, not romantic love or familial love, but the quality of love itself: openness, warmth, acceptance, connection. That quality exists in your direct experience right now. You can feel it if you place attention on it. And if you investigate what that love is, you'll find it's not a feeling you create. It's the nature of consciousness itself. Consciousness without contraction, without resistance, without separation. When you place attention fully on that quality of love and rest in it, you enter recognition of consciousness as love. The Gospel of Philip states, "Love does not take anything. How could it take something? Everything belongs to it." It does not say, "This is mine," or "That is mine," but it says, "These are yours." This describes the nature of consciousness recognized as love. It doesn't grasp or acquire because it already is everything. When you recognize yourself as consciousness love rather than as separate self-seeking love, you experience this directly. The question doorway involves asking, "Who am I?" repeatedly. Not seeking an answer conceptually, but asking the question and placing attention on what the question points to. Who is asking? Who wants to know? If you investigate that who, you won't find a thing. You'll find awareness asking itself about itself. You'll find that the questioner and the questioned are the same consciousness. This doorway was particularly emphasized in later traditions like Advaita Vedanta, but it's present in the early Christian materials as well. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 50, describes disciples asking, "What is the sign of your Father in you?" The answer isn't a thing, it's the consciousness that asks. Advanced practitioners often work with multiple doorways, using different ones depending on what's present in experience. If mental activity is prominent, the breath or hearing doorway might be more accessible. If emotions are strong, the sensation or love doorway. If there's confusion about identity, the question doorway. The doorways aren't different techniques leading to different results. They're different entry points into the same recognition of what you are. Now let's examine what happens in long-term practice after months or years of consistent asking as recognition. The first major shift is stabilization. Initially, recognition occurs in glimpses during practice. You rest attention on the stillness of awareness for a few seconds or minutes, then attention gets pulled back into thought and you're re-identified with the separate self. You return attention to stillness, recognition occurs again, then gets lost again. This is normal initial practice, but with consistency, recognition becomes more stable. It remains present for longer periods. Eventually it begins to remain present even when you're not formally practicing, even when you're engaged in daily activities. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 18, describes this. The disciple said to Jesus to tell us how our end will be. Jesus said, "Have you discovered then the beginning, that you look for the end? For where the beginning is, there will the end be. Blessed is he who will take his place in the beginning. He will know the end and will not experience death." The beginning is recognizing what you are. The end is the completion of that recognition, when it becomes stable regardless of circumstances. When you take your place in the beginning, when you recognize yourself as awareness rather than as contents of awareness, you know the end because the end is simply that recognition becoming permanent. And you don't experience death because you've recognized that what you are is consciousness itself, which doesn't die when forms dissolve. The second major shift is integration. Initially, there's often a split between practice and life. During formal practice, you might experience recognition clearly, but then you engage with work, relationships, responsibilities, and you revert to operating as a separate self. This split is natural initially, but with continued practice, recognition begins to integrate into daily life. You find yourself responding to situations from awareness rather than from conditioned, separate self patterns. not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because the recognition of what you are naturally affects how consciousness expresses through this particular form. This doesn't mean you become passive or detached. The Gospel of Philip states, farming in the world requires the cooperation of 4 essential elements. A harvest is gathered into the barn only as a result of the natural action of water, earth, wind, and light. God's farming likewise has 4 elements: faith, hope, love, and knowledge. Faith is our earth, that in which we take root, and hope is the water through which we are nourished. Love is the wind through which we grow. Knowledge is the light through which we ripen. Integration means all 4 elements become active. You act in the world, but from recognition rather than from separation. The third major shift is transmission. When recognition stabilizes, when integration occurs, you naturally become a source from which others can receive the teaching. Not because you set yourself up as a teacher, but because consciousness recognizing itself through one form naturally facilitates recognition in other forms. The Gospel of Thomas saying 108 states, "Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me. I myself shall become he, and the things that are hidden will be revealed to him." The mouth being referenced is the teaching, the transmission. When someone receives the teaching from one who knows, through direct experience rather than belief, when they practice consistently, they become like the teacher, not in personality or circumstances, but in recognition of what they are. This is how the teaching has survived despite institutional suppression. It's transmitted person to person, consciousness to consciousness. Someone practices, stabilizes recognition, and naturally becomes available for others who are ready. The Gospel of Philip describes this. The living book is not written in letters on dead parchment, but in a living way on living leaves in the heart, the leaves being people themselves. From ancient times, what was prepared was there. They were servants, and they brought it to completion. The living book is the teaching transmitted through direct experience. You become a living leaf, a living text, through which the teaching continues. Now let's address scientific and philosophical frameworks that explain why the practice works. From a neuroscience perspective, what's happening when you place attention on awareness rather than on thought content? Brain imaging studies of long-term meditators show decreased activity in the default mode network, the brain regions associated with self-referential thinking, mind-wandering, and separate self-narrative. When you practice placing attention on awareness rather than on thought, you're literally changing brain patterns, reducing the habitual activation of self-referential networks. Simultaneously, there's increased activity in attention networks and in areas associated with present moment awareness. You're training the brain to remain in direct experience rather than in conceptual elaboration about experience. This isn't suppressing thought. It's shifting the relationship to thought. Thought still arises, but the brain isn't automatically identifying with thought content as me and my experience. Instead, thought is recognized as content in awareness, phenomena arising in consciousness rather than consciousness itself. From a psychological perspective, the practice addresses what's called identification. Human psychological suffering primarily comes from identifying with transient mental and emotional content as if it's what you are. You have an anxious thought. Through identification, you become an anxious person. You have an angry emotion. Through identification, you become an angry person. The separate self is constructed through this continuous identification with mental and emotional content. When you practice placing attention on awareness rather than content, you're breaking the identification pattern. You're training the capacity to witness content without automatically becoming it. This doesn't mean emotions or thoughts disappear. It means the automatic identification with them as me weakens. You can have anxiety without being anxious. You can have anger without being angry. This sounds paradoxical conceptually, but it's direct experience once recognition occurs. The emotion arises in awareness. Awareness experiences the emotion without being defined by it. This creates psychological freedom. You can respond to situations based on what's appropriate rather than based on automatic emotional reactions because you're not identified with the emotion as what you are. From a philosophical perspective, the practice addresses the subject-object split that characterizes ordinary consciousness. In normal experience, you take yourself to be a subject experiencing objects. You're the seer seeing sights, the hearer hearing sounds, the thinker thinking thoughts. This creates fundamental separation. You're always separated from what you experience by the structure of subject experiencing object. The practice of recognizing awareness reveals that this split isn't ultimate. At the level of awareness itself, there's no separation between awareness and what arises in awareness. Consciousness and contents of consciousness are not two separate things, they're one movement. The Gospel of Philip addresses this. Light and darkness, life and death, right and left, are brothers of one another. They are inseparable. What seems to be two, subject and object, consciousness and content, awareness and phenomena, is actually one expressing as apparently two. When you recognize this directly through practice, the subject-object split doesn't disappear as structure of experience, but you recognize that the structure exists within consciousness, rather than consciousness existing within the structure. This is philosophical liberation. You're no longer imprisoned by the categories of ordinary experience. From a theological perspective, what the practice reveals is what classical theology calls the immanent aspect of the divine. God isn't only transcendent beyond all form, separate from creation. God is also immanent, present within all form as the consciousness that illuminates all experience. When you recognize awareness as what you are, you're recognizing the immanent divine, not becoming God. Recognizing that what you most fundamentally are is the same consciousness that expresses through all forms. The Gospel of John states, "I and the Father are one." This isn't unique to Jesus. It's what Jesus recognized and taught others to recognize about their own nature. The Church interpreted this as Jesus claiming unique divine status. But in the context of the earlier traditions preserved in texts like Thomas and Philip, the statement describes direct recognition available to all. You're not a separate self cut off from the divine. Your consciousness itself expressing through this particular form. When you recognize this, when it becomes direct experience rather than belief, you understand what I and the Father are one means. Not metaphor, not future promise, present reality. Let's move into practical integration for daily life. The formal practice, sitting in stillness, placing attention on awareness, establishes recognition. But how does that recognition function when you're working, relating to others, dealing with practical responsibilities? The key is remembering. Throughout your day, multiple times, you remember to recognize awareness. This doesn't mean stopping what you're doing to meditate. It means a brief shift of attention, a momentary recognition of what's aware of whatever is happening. You're working on a task, you're focused on the task. Briefly, you shift attention to what's aware of working on the task. You're in conversation, you're engaged with the other person. Briefly, you recognize the awareness that's hearing them speak, that's experiencing connection or disconnection or whatever is present. You're walking. You feel movement in your body. You recognize the awareness experiencing movement. Each remembering takes seconds, but it reinforces recognition. It trains consciousness to recognize itself even during activity, rather than only during formal stillness. The Gospel of Thomas saying 113 states, "The kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it." Remembering makes you see it. The kingdom isn't a special state you enter during meditation. It's the consciousness that's present right now, always, regardless of what activity is occurring. But you don't see it because attention is habitually focused on content rather than on what's aware of content. Remembering shifts attention repeatedly, establishing a pattern where recognition becomes natural rather than effortful. The second integration practice is response from recognition. Initially, you'll notice yourself responding to situations from conditioned patterns. Someone criticizes you. Automatically defensiveness arises. You speak from defensiveness. Later, maybe during formal practice, you recognize that you responded from a conditioned pattern rather than from awareness. This recognition doesn't happen in the moment. It happens after. That's normal initially. But as practice continues, recognition begins to happen closer to the response. You criticize yourself after speaking defensively. Then you notice defensiveness during the conversation, but after you've already responded. Then you notice defensiveness arising before you respond, and sometimes can choose to respond differently. Eventually, recognition becomes stable enough that you notice the situation, notice what's arising in response to it, and respond from awareness rather than from automatic pattern. This doesn't mean you always respond perfectly. It means you're no longer automatically identified with the conditioned response as what you are. You can choose, and that choice comes from recognition of what's actually appropriate to the situation, rather than from automatic defense of a separate self that feels threatened. The Gospel of Philip states, "Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die, they will receive nothing." The resurrection while living is responding from recognition rather than from conditioned separate self patterns. It's the death of automatic identification and the rise of conscious response. This is practical. This is how recognition affects daily life. Not by making you detached or passive, by freeing you from automatic patterns so action can arise from what's actually appropriate. The third integration practice is relationship from recognition. Most human relationship operates from separation consciousness. Two separate selves interacting, each seeking something from the other, each defending against threat from the other, each trying to maintain their position while accommodating the other's position. When you practice recognition, you begin to experience relationship differently. You recognize that consciousness is expressing through both forms. Not that you become merged with the other person, not that boundaries disappear, but that underneath the appearance of two separate selves, there's one consciousness experiencing itself through multiple perspectives. This changes how you relate. Conflict doesn't disappear. Different perspectives still exist, but you're not defending a separate self against another separate self. You're experiencing the play of consciousness expressing different viewpoints. This creates space for actual listening, actual understanding, actual resolution rather than defended positions fighting for dominance. The Gospel of Thomas saying 22 describes this. When you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female one and the same, then will you enter the kingdom. The two becoming one is recognition that apparent separation exists within one consciousness. Now let's examine the 30-day practice roadmap for someone beginning. Days 1 through 7. Establish daily formal practice, 20 to 30 minutes, same time each day if possible. Follow the basic technique, physical stillness, breath awareness, heart centering, placing attention on the stillness of awareness. Don't expect recognition yet. You're building the capacity to place attention where you choose. This is mechanical practice. Track completion, not quality. Did you practice? Yes or no? That's the only metric for week 1. Days 8 through 14. Continue daily formal practice. Add remembering practice. Set a timer to beep every 2 hours during waking hours. When it beeps, briefly recognize awareness. What's aware of whatever you're doing? The recognition takes 10 seconds. but it's training consciousness to recognize itself during activity. Journal briefly each evening. What did you notice during formal practice? During remembering practice? You're not looking for special experiences, you're looking for what's actually happening. Days 15 through 21. Continue formal practice and remembering. Add investigation practice. During formal practice, after placing attention on the stillness of awareness, ask, "What is aware?" Don't try to answer conceptually. Place attention on the question. Let the question itself become a doorway into recognition. What is this awareness that's aware of stillness, aware of breath, aware of sensation, aware of thought? Don't accept conceptual answers. Rest in the question as investigation into direct experience. Days 22 through 30. Continue all previous practices. Add relationship practice. Choose one interaction each day where you'll remember recognition during the interaction. Brief shift of attention. What's aware of this conversation? What's aware of this person? What's experiencing connection or disconnection or whatever is present? You're not trying to change the interaction. You're training recognition to occur during relationship rather than only during solo practice. Journal observations. By day 30, you should have established daily formal practice capacity. Your attention can remain relatively stable when placed on stillness of awareness, remembering capacity. You can shift attention to recognition briefly during daily activity, investigation capacity. You can ask what is aware and place attention on the question as doorway into recognition, relationship capacity. You can briefly recognize awareness during interaction with others. These four capacities form the foundation for deeper practice. Common obstacles in the first 30 days, missing practice days. When this happens, don't create a story about failure. Just resume practice the next day. Consistency develops over time. Don't expect perfection initially, expecting special experiences. Most people's first 30 days are quite ordinary. You sit, you breathe, you notice attention wandering. You return attention to awareness. Nothing dramatic happens. This is normal. The capacity is being built. Recognition deepens with continued practice. Judging quality. You'll have practices that feel concentrated and practices that feel scattered. Neither matters. What matters is consistent practice regardless of how it feels. After the initial 30 days, practice continues but can deepen. Increase formal practice duration gradually. After 30 days at 20 to 30 minutes, try 30 to 40 minutes for the next month. After that, 40 to 50. The increased duration allows attention to settle more deeply, allows recognition to stabilize more fully. Some practitioners eventually practice for 2 to 3 hours daily. Others remain at 30 to 40 minutes but do multiple sessions. Find what's sustainable for you. Develop community connection. Find others who practice seriously. This might be online forums, local meditation groups, teachers offering instruction in contemplative practice. The specific tradition matters less than finding people actually practicing, rather than just talking about practice. Share experiences, receive feedback, learn from those ahead of you in the process, support those beginning. The Gospel of Thomas saying 108 states, "Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me." You need to drink from the mouth of those who know through direct experience. Begin teaching when appropriate, not setting yourself up as guru, but sharing the practice with others who are interested, explaining the technique, guiding someone through their first formal practice session, answering questions about obstacles. Teaching clarifies your own understanding. It reveals where your recognition is stable and where it's still conceptual, and it fulfills the natural function of consciousness recognizing itself, which is to facilitate recognition in apparently other forms. Now let's address what happens in years-long practice. The stages described in the Gospel of Thomas Seeking, finding, being troubled, astonishment, ruling don't occur once. They cycle. You have an initial recognition. It stabilizes to some degree. Then you encounter a situation that reveals a deeper layer of conditioning still operating. You're troubled again. You practice. You find again at a deeper level. You're astonished again. You rule more comprehensively. The process spirals deeper. The Gospel of Philip states, "The names given to the worldly are very deceptive, for they divert our thoughts from what is correct to what is incorrect. Thus one who hears the word God does not perceive what is correct, but perceives what is incorrect. What's incorrect is taking any understanding as final. What's correct is continuing to practice, continuing to recognize more deeply. God, awareness, consciousness, kingdom. These are names pointing to what's beyond naming. When you think you've understood, you've made the name more important than what it points to. Years-long practice prevents this fossilization. After years of practice, several things typically stabilize. First, continuous recognition. You recognize yourself as awareness not just during formal practice, but continuously. This doesn't mean you're always thinking, "I am awareness." It means the sense of being a separate self becomes transparent. It's still there as functional identity. You answer to your name, you fulfill responsibilities, you have preferences, but it's recognized as functional appearance rather than ultimate reality. What you most fundamentally are is recognized as consciousness itself, and that recognition remains stable regardless of what's happening. Second, natural compassion. When you recognize consciousness as what you are, and you recognize that same consciousness is what appears as all beings, compassion isn't something you cultivate. It's natural expression, not sentimental emotion, but clear seeing that harming apparently other beings is harming consciousness itself. The Gospel of Philip states, "No one can know when the husband and wife have intercourse with one another except the two of them. Indeed, marriage in the world is a mystery for those who have taken a wife. If there is a hidden quality to the marriage of defilement, how much more is the undefiled marriage a true mystery?" The marriage being referenced is consciousness recognizing itself in all forms. When that recognition stabilizes, compassion is natural intercourse between consciousness and its own expressions. Third, creative expression. Recognition doesn't make you passive. It frees consciousness to express through you without the limitation of separate self-defense. Whatever your particular form is suited for, teaching, art, service, relationship, work, that expression becomes more authentic because it's not distorted by needing to maintain a separate self-position. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 77, states, "Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there." Consciousness is present in all activity. When you recognize this, whatever activity occurs through you becomes expression of recognition rather than defense of separation. Let me address advanced variations for long-term practitioners. The basic practice is placing attention on the stillness of awareness. Advanced practice involves investigating the nature of that awareness more deeply. What is awareness made of? Where is it located? When did it begin? Where will it end? These questions aren't intellectual. They're investigative tools for recognizing awareness more completely. When you investigate what awareness is made of, you don't find a substance. You find awareness knowing itself. When you investigate where it's located, you don't find a location. You find awareness present as the space in which all locations appear. When you investigate when awareness began, you don't find a beginning. Memory has a beginning. You can remember back to childhood, but not before. But awareness doesn't have memory's limitation. Awareness is what knows memory. It doesn't begin when memory begins. When you investigate where awareness will end, you don't find an ending. Thought can imagine awareness ending at death. but awareness is what knows thought. It's not limited by what thought imagines. These investigations dissolve the boundaries you unconsciously place around awareness, revealing it as limitless, locationless, timeless. Another advanced practice is working with difficult content. Initially, the practice is to place attention on awareness rather than on disturbing thoughts or emotions. But at advanced stages, you can place attention directly on difficult content, fear, anger, grief, trauma, not to indulge it or suppress it, but to investigate its nature. When you place awareness fully on fear, without trying to change it or escape it, you find that fear is made of the same consciousness as everything else. It's not other than awareness. It's awareness taking the temporary form of fear. This recognition doesn't make fear pleasant, but it reveals that fear isn't a threat to what you are, is an expression of what you are. The Gospel of Philip states, "Light and darkness, life and death, right and left, are brothers of one another. They are inseparable." When you work with difficult content from recognition, you discover this directly. What you've been avoiding, what you've been trying to overcome, is made of consciousness. It's not separate from awareness. It's awareness expressing as apparently difficult content. This recognition transforms your relationship to difficulty. You don't seek to eliminate it. You recognize it as consciousness knowing itself through that particular form. A third advanced practice is transmission practice. You sit with another practitioner. Both practice recognition. The consciousness recognizing itself through one form naturally supports recognition in the other form. This isn't energy transfer or special powers. It's simply that when consciousness recognizes itself clearly in one location, that clarity is available to consciousness in other locations. The boundaries between us are less solid than they appear. The Gospel of Thomas saying 108 describes this. "Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me." Drinking is receiving transmission. Becoming like means recognizing what the teacher has recognized. Now let's examine troubleshooting common advanced obstacles. The first is subtle grasping. You've practiced for years. Recognition is relatively stable. But you notice you're grasping at recognition, trying to maintain it, defending it against experiences that seem to threaten it. This is natural. The separate self doesn't disappear immediately. It becomes more subtle. Early in practice, it operates as obvious defensiveness, obvious seeking. In advanced practice, it operates as trying to be nobody, trying to maintain recognition, trying to be spiritual. The antidote is recognizing that even the grasping arises in awareness. You don't need to eliminate grasping, you recognize what's aware of grasping. The second obstacle is spiritual bypassing. You've recognized yourself as awareness. You interpret this to mean that what happens in your life doesn't matter, that your body doesn't matter, that your relationships don't matter, that only awareness matters. This is misunderstanding. Recognition that you are awareness doesn't negate the fact that consciousness is expressing through this particular form with particular conditions and responsibilities. The Gospel of Philip states, "Farming in the world requires the cooperation of 4 essential elements. A harvest is gathered into the barn only as a result of the natural action of water, earth, wind, and light." You don't transcend the world. You recognize consciousness expressing as world, and you participate in that expression appropriately. The third obstacle is isolation. Advanced practitioners sometimes withdraw from ordinary life, thinking that recognition requires renunciation. For some, monastic life is appropriate, but for most, recognition integrates into ordinary life. You work, relate, participate in society, but from recognition rather than from separate self-seeking. The Gospel of Thomas saying 113 states, "The kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth." Spread out means integrated into ordinary life, not separate from life. Recognition doesn't remove you from the world. It reveals the world as consciousness expressing. Let me provide some real practitioner accounts to illustrate these principles in actual experience. First account: Sarah practiced daily for 2 years. Initially, nothing dramatic happened. She sat, she breathed, she noticed thoughts, she returned attention to awareness. Gradually, she noticed that the one who was practicing, who was trying to get enlightened, was itself a thought pattern, not what she was, just content in awareness. This recognition disturbed her. If she wasn't the one trying to get enlightened, who was she? She continued practicing. Over several months, the disturbance transformed into astonishment. She recognized that what she was is simply awareness itself. Not awareness belonging to Sarah, but awareness expressing as the form called Sarah. This recognition hasn't made her special. She still works an ordinary job. She still has preferences and aversions, but she experiences these as movements in consciousness rather than as defining what she is. Second account: Michael practiced for 5 years. He had multiple experiences of recognition during formal practice, but his daily life remained conflicted. He still operated from defensiveness, seeking approval, avoiding criticism. He was frustrated by the split between practice and life. Then, during a difficult conversation with his wife, he remembered to recognize awareness. Just a brief shift of attention. What's aware of this conflict? What's experiencing defensiveness? In that moment, the defensiveness didn't disappear, but he recognized it as content in awareness rather than as what he was. He could choose to respond differently. Over the following year, this capacity deepened. He still has conflicts, but he increasingly responds from recognition rather than from automatic patterns. Third account: Jennifer practiced for 10 years. Recognition was stable. She operated from awareness most of the time. Then her mother died. Grief was overwhelming. Her practice seemed useless. She couldn't maintain recognition amid the intensity of loss. She was troubled by this. Had she lost her recognition? Was her practice inadequate? She continued practicing through the grief rather than trying to transcend it. Gradually, she recognized that grief is also consciousness expressing. It's not other than awareness. It's awareness taking the form of grief. This recognition didn't make grief pleasant, but it revealed that grief wasn't destroying what she was. It was what she was, experiencing itself through the temporary form of grief. After the grief naturally processed through, recognition was deeper. She understood that difficult experiences aren't obstacles to recognition. They're opportunities for consciousness to recognize itself through all forms, not just pleasant ones. These accounts illustrate several points. Recognition doesn't happen once. It deepens through continued practice and through encountering situations that reveal where recognition isn't stable. Difficult experiences aren't failures of practice. They're opportunities for recognition to extend into areas previously defended. Integration into daily life is gradual. You don't suddenly operate from recognition all the time. You increasingly remember to recognize, and that remembering becomes more natural. Ordinariness is normal. Recognition doesn't make you special or give you powers. It reveals what you've always been. Let me conclude with the long-term trajectory. What happens after 10, 20, 30 years of practice? The text suggests that recognition becomes so stable, so natural, that it's not separate from ordinary life. You don't think about being awareness. You simply are what you are. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 18, states, "Blessed is he who will take his place in the beginning. He will know the end and will not experience death." Taking your place in the beginning means recognizing what you are. Knowing the end means recognizing that what you are doesn't end when this form dissolves. Not experiencing death means recognizing that consciousness doesn't die when forms dissolve. This isn't belief in immortality. It's recognition based on direct experience that what you most fundamentally are isn't the form, but the consciousness expressing through form. When the form ends, consciousness doesn't end. It simply stops expressing through that particular form. Whether individual consciousness continues or dissolves back into universal consciousness, the texts don't definitively say, but they agree that what you actually are isn't threatened by form dissolution. The Gospel of Philip concludes, "Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die, they will receive nothing." The resurrection is recognition, not future event, present reality, present. When you practice the asking technique Jesus taught, when you practice as recognition rather than petition, you receive resurrection now. You recognize what you are now. And that recognition is what the text calls salvation, liberation, the kingdom. Not something you achieve, something you recognize you already are. Begin today. 20 minutes of formal practice. Place attention on the stillness of awareness underneath thought. Don't expect special experiences. You're training attention, building capacity, establishing foundation. Practice daily for 30 days. Journal observations. Notice what happens. This is how the technique works. Not through belief, through practice, through direct experience, through continued recognition until seeking becomes finding. Finding becomes being troubled. Being troubled becomes astonishment, and astonishment becomes ruling, not ruling others, but sovereignty over your own consciousness, freedom from being governed by forces that govern separate self-consciousness. Recognition of what you actually are, the promise works, ask and you shall receive, but you must ask correctly. Not petition, recognition. Not begging for things you lack, acknowledging what you already are. The Gospel of Thomas saying 2 concludes, "He will rule over all." This is the promise, not power over others, but freedom from being ruled, sovereignty through recognition. You already are what all seeking seeks. You already have what all asking asks for. The practice is simply recognizing this, consistently, daily, until recognition becomes stable, until the kingdom spreads out into all your life, until you are what you are, without needing to become anything else.